Welcome to the first Matriarch Summit. While we would have loved to have this summit in person and gotten to brainstorm, collaborate, and plot together, we are still so grateful to all of you for joining us live or watching us later, as this is a very busy time for the Friday before the election. We are extremely thankful for your patience as we are live in a Zoom world today. My name is Nomiki Konst, and I am the director of Matriarch and one of the founders. A few years ago, a group of leftist women started brainstorming what it would look like to prioritize working-class women's concerns in politics. We started having conversations about a platform, the challenges facing working-class women when running, and what institutional voids existed. Then the squad came and made that case for our mission much easier to explain to the mainstream and even some of us on the left. We launched Matriarch to not only work early and closely with progressive working-class women running for office, but to elevate intersectional feminism, one for all women, one based on addressing and prioritizing systemic issues, one which believes in solidarity and does not consider how capital will react when we speak up. What was born was Matriarch, a coalition of progressive female leaders across the country from many industries supporting progressive working-class candidates early and elevating our agenda. In one very crazy year, to say the least, we helped a slate of 11 candidates, who will speak today, build their campaigns, take on the establishment, and build coalitions. Later, you will hear from Kate Albright-Hannah, who is a board member, about how we supported these campaigns. But I want to talk to you about why Matriarch is needed. Women face tremendous challenges when running for office. If they decide on their own to run, not recruited, and have never run before, they need to make their case. It takes the average woman 3 times to run before they win. Hello, Cori Bush. But if you are a working woman, a progressive working woman, who felt inspired to run because you were fed up, tired, and disgusted by leadership and what they represent in your community, you may not know where to go. The press ignores you until you raise enough money or get big endorsements. Donors ignore you until you have big organizations and leaders endorsing you. Leaders ignore you until they see what you're polling at or have raised a certain amount of money. Coalitions may come, but often those coalitions come late. And the establishment usually has built a massive operation, bought advertising and mail, and has tied up talent. The progressive infrastructure is growing. The progressive platform is popular. But working class women, who have often had to leave work, have childcare issues, more debt, may not have healthy care of their own, and they often work while running. They have enough challenges. And then they are second guessed. There are more questions about viability from donors, the media, political groups, and even leaders. And when they do prove that they're viable, studies have shown that they are smeared worse, attacked in the press worse, and oftentimes don't have the good old boys or establishment to fight back against these attacks. This is why we formed Matriarch. It is not just a sisterhood. It is not just a mentorship group. It's not just here to offer pro bono campaign support. We are a scrappy grassroots group dedicated to elevating the voices of progressive working class women who have put it all on the line to run for their communities, for you, for their families. And when they reach Congress, we know they will make sure Medicare for all, a minimum wage that reflects the cost of the world that we live in, is prioritized. They'll fight for labor and fully funding public schools and racial justice. They'll prioritize the root causes of our inequities. So today's summit is about the path, the issues, and the strategy to build a government that is reflective of those on the front line of this pandemic and economic crisis. I'm going to be your MC tonight, and I am thrilled to announce that our speakers include Barbara Smith, Sarah Nelson, Corey Bush, she is our final speaker, so you definitely want to stick around. Jane McAlevey, Francesca Fiorentini, Nabila Islam, Melanie DeRigo, Assan Laki, Kate Albright-Hannah, Tara Houska, Javonka Beckles, Christine Pellegrino, and Eileen Flanagan, telling us how to stop the coup that is possibly underway. If you are new to Matriarch and want to help support our work, we are going to keep asking you. We do trainings and organizing, and next year is a big year for us as we face redistricting. We want to make sure that there are progressive women out there in front, able to run next cycle so we can double the size of the progressives in Congress. You can go to matriarchpac.com to learn more. Of course, your contributions are welcome. That is how we build this infrastructure and make it happen. We'll be right back with our first guest, Sarah Nelson.
Hi, Matriarch.
Sarah Nelson is it's Zoom. Sarah Nelson is the president of the Association of Flight Attendants, a CWA union. She represents 50,000 workers at 20 airlines, and she has been a union activist since 1996. She was labeled America's most powerful flight attendant, and dare we say it, one of America's most powerful union leaders. Sarah Nelson, thank you for joining us today on Matriarch. It is all yours, the stage.
Thank you, Nomiki. This is extraordinary to be here tonight. And actually, I got to say, just what I needed. Being here with all of you is pretty extraordinary. And I can't believe that I'm here talking to you with powerhouses like Barbara Smith and Jane McAlevey and Corey Bush and so many other amazing women who are stepping up to the table, whether there's a chair there or not. And I just have to note that's quite an introduction, because when I saw that headline in the New York Times on the front page of the business section that said most powerful flight attendant, I have to say that I was a little taken aback, and I thought that maybe we were being a little bit made fun of because of our history. Because flight attendants had been set up to be commodities for the airlines. We were sexualized, and they ran marketing schemes with things like, I'm Cheryl, fly me. And you couldn't have this as a career. You had to quit when you were age 30 or when you got married or had a kid. You couldn't even be hired if you were a Black woman or Latino or a man, for that matter. And you had to step on a weight scale until 1992. And it's all of those things that the amazing women who came before me and built up this union fought back against and made it possible for anyone with the heart of a flight attendant to be one. And so as I started to take in the fact that the New York Times had made this a headline in their Sunday business section, and that the Delta Airlines CEO had a profile on page 4 that week, by the way, I started to take in the fact that the New York Times was saying flight attendant and powerful in the same headline. And that was really flipping the script. And that had been because women had fought back together, formed our own way, defined our careers, made it possible for us to have a way to fight forward. And so when the Me Too movement broke, that was about women standing together. That was about women saying, I've got your back. This week I asked, can we just please do away with the greeting, how are you? If you're going to ask the question, how are you, make it mean something and sit there and be ready to take on what someone's going to give you. But that's not what we do. It's a throwaway. And so one of my sisters suggested to me, how about we just greet each other with, I love you and I've got your back. And that is exactly what happened with the Me Too movement and what made it possible for women to have each other's backs and tell their stories and actually speak up and not be dismissed. And at the time when that broke, I said to my union and to my staff, we've got to get on this because we're going to get calls because people are going to look around and say, gee, who might have stories about sexual harassment at work? And certainly flight attendants have experienced them. And so we got stories from flight attendants all over the place. And certainly they reinforced my own stories that I could tell about someone coming up behind me when I'm setting up the galley and a man rubbing my hip and saying, oh, no girdle? How can you look so good without a girdle? And then really dismissing me in front of other union leaders in the middle of a tough bargaining time with a management person asking me for a hug in front of everyone. You know, these are the things that we have had to fight against and fight straight through. And so we have carved out our own path, and that's what my union did. We defined our role as aviation's first responders. We became certified. We built into the regulations that flight attendants have to be on the plane in order for planes to take off. So surely they don't take off without pilots, but they also don't take off if flight attendants are not there either. And we did all of that, but then the Me Too movement broke. And all of a sudden, we had the ability to demand that we not only be not seen that way, but other people give us respect. That we not only have respect for each other and know that we can take care of ourselves, but that we can demand that respect from the rest of society. And so we asked people to tell their stories. And I got all kinds of stories. I got stories about sexual harassment. I also got a story like this, where a man who was a flight attendant told me that he was working a flight from LA to Sydney. And he was in the galley, in the business class galley, and he turned around and looked into the aisle to see how things were going, see what his flying partners needed. And he saw one of his flying partners who was going down the aisle with some champagne glasses, and a passenger reached out and hit her on the rear end. And he got his back up and stood there in the aisle and was ready to go defend her. And she whipped around and she said to that passenger, she said, you, if you were half as good looking as you think you are, you might stand a chance, but you're not. So sit down and shut up and don't you touch anyone else on this flight. And then she turned around to my friend and she said, and you get back in the galley where you belong. I don't need a man to take care of me. I can take care of myself. So we heard stories like that, and that was the attitude that we could inspire because we knew that we had each other's backs on the planes, but we never expected anyone else to have our backs for us. And so it was a painful time actually hearing these stories that people would work through it. I was in a crew room and I heard flight attendants from 6 months on the job to 20 years on the job who would tell me stories, and I would say, and then what do you do? And they would say, well, we put them in their place, tell them not to, whatever. And I'd say, every time? And then the conversation would really start. And they'd say, it was a full airplane. I had to take care of everyone else. I had to keep going. No, I didn't report it to management. What were they going to do? And I'd have to report it through the cockpit, who wouldn't listen to me. And then we did a survey and we found that only 7% of flight attendants had felt that they could report the issue, and only half of them said that they would encourage other flight attendants to do the same. But nearly 2/3 had experienced sexual harassment or physical harassment in the prior year alone. And we heard all these stories, but we were not hearing from the men. We're 80% women on the job, but we were not hearing from our brothers. And so I asked some of them, because I have seen some of them be objectified just like any of the women that I work with. And I asked them, why aren't you telling your stories? And they said to me to a T, they said, Sarah, we're in a workforce of 80% women. This is a moment for women's equality. If we want to have any power at the bargaining table to get what we truly deserve for the work that we do for these airlines, we have to make sure that women have equal footing everywhere. And so that's true. Making sure that women have the ability to join unions and run unions, negotiate our contracts where there's automatically equal pay. That's all about improving our bargaining position, improving our place in society, and being able to step up to every single table. And so I go everywhere telling women, join unions and run unions, because the labor movement is not a club. The labor movement is for working people. Right now, during this pandemic, we are seeing all of the problems with the fact that our labor movement has been reduced to almost nothing in this country. With this exception, the airline industry is 80% organized. We've seen crisis before. We've seen how there are people who, when you're grieving, when you're trying to make it through, when there's all kinds of slogans about, being an American and picking yourself up by your bootstraps and making sure that we can get by and everybody sacrifices equally. Well, that's all true. There's a lot of solidarity in this country. And that spirit of solidarity is real and exists in the working class. But it does not exist in the corporate class. In fact, they take advantage of it. During this pandemic, they've called us essential workers, applauded us, had big parades of applauding from windows around the country, said that people should be getting hazard pay. And yet in the negotiations in Congress, when talking about hazard pay, the corporations lobbied hard to make sure that it would be voluntary, because they said, we can't raise expectations for workers. And if we give this pay to them now, they're going to expect more after the pandemic too. The truth is that without unions, we've driven to a place where people can't live through a $400 unexpected expense. 8 million people have gone into poverty. Almost 60 million people have filed for unemployment. And in March, what we did, because we're 80% organized, is the chairman of the Transportation and Infrastructure Committee, who would see through what the relief would look for airlines who had lost 97% of our traffic overnight, said to the airlines, I'm not talking to you until you talk to labor. And so we had negotiations about what our federal relief package was going to look like. And we created a federal relief package that was workers first. We said to the airlines, you've squeezed everyone so hard, America hates you, and you're not going to get anything unless you work through us. And so we created a relief package, not a stimulus. Let's face it, we're in the middle of this crisis, but a relief package that was workers focused. Number one, all of the money had to go to covering the pay and benefits of the workers, had to go to the workers, could not be spent on anything else. If you leave it up to the market applauds furloughs, applauds layoffs, applauds companies getting smaller because they're going to be spending less on labor. It also said you cannot cut pay rates, because that's the other thing that they'll try to inspire during a time like this. And it said that you must continue service to all communities that you served on March 1st, because no one should have to suffer. If we're giving you federal dollars to keep the airlines going, then we should make sure that all of our communities are getting that service equally, continuing to get the US mail and everything else that our airlines connect us to. So it's a jobs and infrastructure plan. 1.25% of the entire $2 trillion CARES Act, because we're 80% union in the airline industry. So it wasn't a bailout, and it especially wasn't a bailout. We made really sure, because we added restrictions on those executives too. A cap on executive compensation and no stock buybacks or dividends well after the relief period is over. But October 1st was when those requirements ended. And the airline industry is just back to 40% of the demand it was a year ago, and half of that revenue in place. And that is because we have a president who not only before this virus said it was okay to handle women. We've had people on the planes touch women and sexually assault them and say, well, why can't I do it? The president of the United States can do it. And then during this virus, denying it, not giving us the information that we needed to combat it. We fought hard in our union to have OSHA training to be able to combat this at work and stop communicable disease at transportation store. I know what it looks like when our government works with unions and industry and has a plan in transportation and actually goes to the source and puts US resources in the place where the virus, where the contagion has started, so that we can try to nip it in the bud before it works its way around the rest of the world. I know what it looks like when you have a plan. I also know what it looks like when we have a president who has done nothing but try to divide us and keep us at odds with each other and have us believe that politics are identity. We need women to lead going forward. Matriarch is the most important place where you can put your dollars right now, because the only people who are going to lead us forward out of this are people who understand what it means to have a union contract, who understands what it means to negotiate and have collective power, and who understands what it means to be marginalized. And so we have learned to lead without ego. And we've learned to bring people together. And we've also led strike votes and real strike threats and run strikes too. And that has meant bringing everyone together and saying, here are our demands. Here is what we need. We have way more in common than anything that can divide us. So it doesn't matter what you look like, where you come from, or who you love. We're in this together, and we're going to have each other's backs. That's the spirit that Matriarch brings to the political process. We need that kind of thought in government everywhere. We need to support people who are willing to run with those ideals, who have lived them, who have done them. That's how we're going to heal our nation. That's how we're going to solve the big problems before us. And that's how we're going to understand that immigration rights are workers' rights. That tackling the climate crisis is about making sure that workers have access to good jobs and that workers have clean communities to go home to and good drinking water to have for their families. These are our issues as working people. And I just want to close out with one thing, and that is, don't be afraid of your emotions, and don't let them say that your emotions are a weakness. Your emotions are your superpower. As Mother Jones put it, don't be ladylike. She said, I'm not a humanitarian, I'm a hellraiser. No matter what the fight, don't be ladylike. God Almighty made women, and Rockefeller and his gang of thieves made the ladies. We have real power as women because we have each other's backs and because we know how to get things done and because we're never going to go away, never going to stop. I am so proud to be on the Matriarch board. I encourage everyone to put your dollars here. These are dollars well spent, and lift up every candidate that Matriarch supports. Thanks to the entire board, thanks to Nomiki, thanks to the amazing women who are with me here tonight. And let's move forward together. Solidarity.
Thank you, Sarah. I wish we had an applause line. We can't do it. Thank you so much for your work. We are incredibly grateful for the leadership, and we're excited to see how you leverage this amazing movement in pressuring either administration to do what is right and go much further. We are so grateful to you.
Thank you. Relief now.
Yes, relief now. All right, our next speaker is Barbara Smith. You may know Barbara Smith for so many reasons. She was nominated for a Nobel Peace Prize. She is the co-founder and publisher until 1995, the Kitchen Table Women of Color Press, the first U.S. publisher for women of color. She's an author, activist, independent scholar who has played a groundbreaking role in opening up a national cultural and political dialogue about the intersections of race, class, sexuality, and gender. And I think for many of us who are feminist wonks, she is the co-founder of the Combahee River Collective. We are beyond grateful and honored to have Barbara Smith as one of our keynote speakers today. Barbara.
Hi, everybody. Am I visible? I
Yes,
hope
you
so.
are. You are.
Yeah, okay. I was told not to do anything with audio and video, but then I thought, well, it says mute and, no video, so let me do something. So I did it myself. I was so happy to find out just a little while ago about Matriarch PAC, and also then to be honored to be asked to speak at your summit this evening. I'm doing things the old-fashioned way. I'll be reading most of what I say to you because that's what I do when they say it's a keynote. So if you see me not looking in the right place, it's because I'm looking at the paper. But nevertheless, as I said, I'm really excited to be with you. The theme, class and feminism, could not be more relevant at a time when women, specifically working class and poor women, who are also disproportionately women of color, are bearing the brunt of the multiple crises that we face. The COVID pandemic, the economic depression, which has needlessly resulted from the pandemic, which makes it impossible for people to provide for their families, their families' basic needs. The centuries-long crisis of white supremacy, entrenched racial inequality, and state-sanctioned violence, and the climate crisis that affects absolutely every one of us. When we look at the situation of women, and what is going on in our families and communities, with the understanding that class and as well as race shape women's lives just as much as surely as gender and sexuality, then we can organize and build movements that can move us toward justice and liberation. Interrogating economic privilege and racial privilege is particularly important at a time when the very meaning of feminism has become so incredibly distorted and is now thought to mean only access for financially secure white women to the highest levels of corporate and political power. Having always worked in grassroots movements for social justice, I often don't even recognize what passes for feminism now. The lean-end version of feminism, which is what we used to call bourgeois feminism, is simply not an option for most women, not only in this country, but all over the globe. Here's a definition of feminism that I shared in a speech at the first National Women's Studies Association conference in 1979. Quoting myself, "Feminism is a political theory in practice that struggles to free all women, women of color, working class women, poor women, disabled women, Jewish women, lesbians, old women, as well as white, economically privileged, heterosexual women. Anything less than this version of total freedom is not feminism, but merely female self-aggrandizement." If I was writing this definition today, I would add many more different kinds of women, including trans women, femmes, Muslim, and immigrant women. We are a big tent. And that was a point I was making in 1979, which was more than 40 years ago. Well, yes, more than 40 years ago. It is obvious that Matriarch PAC and also the candidates that you support understand this expansive and inclusive vision of feminism. It is critical that all of our voices be heard and that people who are deeply connected to the real life struggles of our communities get the opportunity to serve and represent us. Some of you may not know that I actually did what you have done and what some of you want to do, which is to run for office. In 2005, I decided to run for our city council in Albany, New York. I'd never been involved in electoral politics in that way, although I was a prime voter because my people bled and died for me to vote. So, of course, I was going to be a voter. But as I said, I'd never been involved in electoral politics. I lived then and still live in a predominantly Black, economically distressed community. And one of the major reasons that I decided to run was because of what was going on with the police, with police brutality, and with other issues having to do with police and violence. And so I found myself at the ripe old age of 50-something running for office for the first time. And I learned a huge amount. I did win, and I actually went on to serve 2 terms on our Albany Common Council. We had a huge legacy machine in Albany, a democratic machine. And I, of course, was not a part of that. So I served in a context, it's kind of like, I guess, the squad now serving in Congress, because in the executive branch, that's not where the support was coming from. The support was coming from the grassroots. One of the things that really interested me during those years about serving on the Common Council, it's called the Common Council in Albany, is that I did it as a Black feminist without necessarily bringing those Black feminist politics front and center in everything that I did. Every decision that I made, every way I evaluated a problem or a situation, all of it went right back to my roots in Black feminism and also in movements, progressive movements, leftist movements in general. So without explicitly saying, I'm your Black feminist councilwoman, I tried to do the work informed by my Black feminist values. I learned a huge amount. And one of the things I learned is why it is important for not the usual suspects to seek office, to run, to succeed, and then to govern. It does make a difference. And that's why Matriarch PAC is so important. It is supporting the people who would otherwise be shut out of that political game as it is played with big bucks and male patriarchal dominance. It is letting people like me and like you into that. And we see the difference that that can make. In order to talk about class and feminism, we also need to be able to talk about race. It is actually not possible to understand how class functions in the United States without seeing how it is inextricably tied to race and racial exploitation. You cannot talk about class in the United States without talking about race, and you cannot talk about race in the United States without talking about class. America's class structure is defined by race and racism, if for no other reason than the fact that American wealth was built on the genocide and land theft of indigenous people and slavery, the labor theft of enslaved Africans. The Combahee River Collective, which was already mentioned, not for nerds only, I hope, are wonks only, feminist wonks. I like that idea, that concept, because I certainly would be one of them. The Combahee River Collective, founded in the mid-1970s and most known for having written the Combahee River Collective Statement, made a significant contribution to creating ways for us to grasp how these various interlocking systems of oppression connect and how they even reproduce each other. Combahee also opened space in the second wave of the women's movement for people to grapple with the realities of difference and to figure out how to build solidarity and a stronger anti-racist women's movement. I am pretty sure that that is what Matriarch PAC is committed to, building an anti-racist women's movement for the 99%, for the people who are not in those C-suites and leaning in and doing whatever the hell else they do, but who are trying to figure out how to keep body and soul together and juggle all the things that we do. And for those of you who have those kinds of typical responsibilities of caring for family members, doing homeschooling at this point, virtual learning with your kids, wondering whether to send them to school, having health care that is hanging by a thread because it's connected to employment. Why? That's why we need Medicare for all. For all of you who are taking that step, making that commitment, we honor you and we support you. We have a big fight ahead, and it's terrific that we are meeting with each other a few days before the last day of voting in this 2020 election cycle. I know we have big hopes for what will follow after that day, as well as lots of nerves and anxiety too. But whatever happens, we do have a big fight ahead of us, and we can only do it together. I've always been a political optimist, despite all, because I'm based, and my political reality is based in people's struggle. And certainly when that struggle encompasses the incredible power and vision of motivated and brave women, then we are much more than halfway toward that goal that we have of liberation and justice. Thank you so much.
Barbara, thank you so much for your inspiring words. Oh my God, in your lifetime of commitment. Reading your bio, I was just like, what do we highlight? How does she have time? She's just so committed to the cause and has written so much great work and has, from running for office to writing great work to leading the fight and organizing. We are grateful to have you in the Matriarch family, and we're excited to work with you in the future so we can get to organizing and getting more working class, progressive, diverse women, all women, elected to office so that they prioritize these issues. So thank you. All right, Kate Albright-Hannah is an award-winning documentary filmmaker who has produced films and talk shows for CNN, MSNBC, and Vice. She directed the 2008 campaign video program for the Obama campaign and the 2009 White House Summit on healthcare reform. She is a progressive. She ran for state rep in Western Massachusetts, and she is on our board of directors. She was very involved in the recruitment and selection, I guess, of the candidates that we supported this cycle, and she's going to talk a little bit about that. But not only that, she's also writing a novel about political activists in the 21st century. Kate, welcome. The floor is yours. I think there's a little feedback, just as a heads up. I think we're dealing with some technical issues. Let's just sort that out. This is the era of Zoom.
Hey, I am testing my audio. Do you hear me?
You are there.
Okay, one moment. Can you hear me now?
You're live.
Hold on. One second. All right, can you hear me now?
We can hear you. You're live.
Okay. All right. Thank you so much, Nomi. All right. So for most of my career, I've been following the story of the progressive movement as a documentary filmmaker covering the erosion of civil liberties after 9/11, the rise of the Netroots with Howard Dean's campaign in 2004, police shootings in New Orleans after Hurricane Katrina, as a filmmaker on the staff of the Obama campaign in 2008, as a talk show producer at MSNBC during Occupy in 2011. I've even covered the flip side of that movement when I was at Vice. I took a ride on the Tea Party Express bus and then filmed a bunch of right-wing militia guys at a paint gun range while they trained for what they called, quote, the Second American Revolution. That was in 2009, and today in 2020, the, quote, revolution or civil war those guys were preparing for feels a lot less like cosplay and more like a dark premonition of things to come, perhaps as early as next week. The story of the progressive movement is approaching a turning point as it faces both a fascist right-wing movement and a liberal wing vainly hoping that civility and norms will maintain this capitalist status quo. Up until this moment, true progress has come slowly, haltingly. The infrastructure that professional progressive organizations have put in place has created space for new growth while the old structures begin to crumble. But the current progressive infrastructure also has excluded its potentially most powerful force. And it does so in a way that is actually very cold and cruel. It says to girls and women, dream big, we need you, run for office, believe in yourself, you're the future. And then if a woman does put herself out there and she's someone who loses her health care when she leaves her job to run for office, or she's a mom who can't afford childcare when she leaves her job to run for office, or she's a normal person who doesn't have a Rolodex of friends and family member able to dole out $500 checks, then very often the progressive movement turns its back on her and acts like she's invisible. The progressive movement says, come back to us when you make some rich friends and can play the game properly. That gap, the one that exists between the sort of ambient you go girl rhetoric and the reality of running for office when you're a progressive working class woman, and especially when you're a working class woman of color, that gap is what Matriarch was built for. Our mission is to find the strongest, most tenacious, most inspiring women out there and support them from day one before they can, quote, prove to us that they can hit the fundraising numbers that the professional political class obsesses over. We find raw talent and we nurture it and connect it to other amazing women across the country who are facing similar obstacles while they seize openings to build progressive power. Our 2020 freshman class of Matriarch candidates built a truly powerful and inspiring sisterhood as they ran for office during a pandemic, from Washington State to Arizona to Missouri to Georgia to New York. And Matriarch was there to fill the gaps with regular trainings on FEC filings, on how to deal with the press, how to tell their stories, and how to build their team, all the stuff that nobody tells you when you're starting out alone without connections or a powerful family name. So anyway, as I said, I've been following the story of the progressive movement since I was sent down to Florida by CNN to cover the election recount story in 2000. I'm still waiting for the good guys to win. I'm convinced that progressive working class women are the heroes we've been waiting for. And even more specifically, Cori Bush, a Matriarch co-founder and star of our 2020 class of candidates, is the hero I've been waiting for. You'll hear from her later tonight. And oh my God, get ready for so much winning when you do. Thank you so much for the time, Nomi.
We look forward to all that winning. I just want to give a special shout out to Kate because Kate is on our political committee, and she, being the brilliant documentary filmmaker that she is, knew exactly how to get to the root of each candidate's story and why their mission and their personal background was perfect for Matriarch. I mean, all of our women that ran for office, all the candidates had personal motivations, were fed up. Some had run before, like Cori, and didn't give up despite all of the setbacks, all of the obstacles, all of the benchmarks that the establishment throws at them along the way. And what I will say about Kate and her brilliant way of asking questions is she always prioritized those issues. Of course, we want to know about path to victory and all those things so we can help them get to that path to victory, but she has always been rooted and in the fundamentals of what makes a great leader. And I just want to say on behalf of the rest of the board of Matriarch, thank you, Kate, for your commitment to doing all of that and cutting videos and writing scripts and all the things you do on the back end to help candidates out.
It's a pleasure.
All right, our next speaker is the one and only Francesca Fiorentini. She is a journalist and comedian. She's the host of Newsbroke on AJ+. The Bitchuation Room podcast, you have to go check that podcast out. It's brilliant. And you may have seen her special on Medicare for All on MSNBC called Red, White, and Who. She is a longtime activist. We're talking about lifelong activist, and we're just so grateful to have Francesca. Francesca, thank you for joining us.
Thank you, Nomi. I really appreciate you having me, and I just love this lineup. I love it. It's so good. I wish we were all in the same space, all doing this together, but thank you for watching and for being here. It is a crazy week, and yet here we are. It is interesting that I'm being asked to speak about class and feminism after Barbara Smith. Following Barbara Smith is like being a SoundCloud rapper being asked to follow KRS-One and talk about rap. Like, okay, cool. You want me to tell you about class and feminism. Barbara Smith. I am a total feminist wonk, and everyone should be. And I have been inspired by the third wave and third world feminist movements from here in the US to around the world. And Barbara Smith and Combahee River Collective was such a part of that and such a part of my political formation when I became radicalized in the 2000s, right? Before, at the tail end of the global justice movement and the beginning of the anti-war movement. And back when we couldn't imagine a worse president than George W. Bush. And no, I don't miss him. I will never, ever, ever miss him. Oh my God, this is the reason we are in this mess to begin with. But we're also in this mess because I think we've seen the ways that the Democratic establishment has dropped the ball when it comes to truly understanding their adversary and understanding that they have an adversary. And maybe that's because some of them receive the same amount of funding and the same amount of funding sources, the same kinds of funding sources as Republicans do. So it's clear that the Democratic Party is not necessarily going to fight for us unless we fight for it, right? Unless we change the game, unless we run candidates like Nabila Islam and like Cori Bush and support groups like Matriarch PAC. I don't know how much I can add, but I want to just say that, no matter what happens, no matter if there is a landslide for Biden, if there is a squeaker, if there is a Supreme Court decision, if Trump refuses to leave, if he builds himself a little bunker and just stays there forever and ever and ever and tweets, and, it could all be possible, that we have real fascism on our hands. And I think we know that the more we can make our movements intersectional, the more that we see the ways that the reproductive rights movement is connected to the racial justice movement, is connected to the economic justice movement. The more that we get out of our silos and our single issue organizing, the more we're going to win, right? And we've seen that proof in the pudding by organizations like the Sunrise Movement and Justice Democrats and a lot of others, right? And I think now is the time where you have to be like, this is the united front that we need to carry us through the election and to actually defeat fascism. Because it's not going to go anywhere. We all know it's sadly not going to go anywhere, even if Trump eventually does concede or doesn't or what have you. You all don't need to hear this from me. There are people who are far smarter on these issues, but I do just want to name that I think that coming up as a progressive, as a lefty, there has been a divide that is all the more clear now when it comes to feminism and class issues, right? When it comes to race issues and class issues, we are constantly being told that we have to pick one of these buckets. And it has contributed to a culture on the left that is incredibly toxic and is incredibly stupid, for lack of a better term, right? I think that a lot of it has to stem from the Democratic Party, which once again, they aren't able to talk about their funding sources. They aren't able to talk about the pharmaceutical companies that pay their campaign coffers. They're unable to talk about that. So what do? They use women and they use people of color, and they reduce them down into their most essentialist identities, and they leave the politics behind. Barbara Smith coined identity politics, and she and her fellow sisters and fellow feminists and women of color and badass queer activists coined this term that a lot of the Democratic Party has been hollowing out and selling for parts. And that is not liberation, right? That is not real transformation. And because they can't talk about economic justice, the Democrats inevitably only talk about gender and race. And that ain't it. that's not gonna cut it for us, and that's not going to actually help us. And so in reaction, I think we've got some other toxic elements on the left that only reduce everything to class. And they think, well, yeah, man, this is the socialist way is the way to go. And class, gender, what? Who? And I think we don't, we know who those folks are. And of course, look, I love Bernie, and Bernie's my guy. So I'm not talking about that. I'm just talking about certain elements of a left movement, and that is reacting to the Democratic establishment. This is a false dichotomy. This is a false divide. And it's stupid, and we're not going to win with it. I think that one of the things we have to remember, one of the things I look to, Alicia Garza, the founder of BLM, one of the founders, went on to, and it has a project called the Black Futures Lab. And they did an incredible polling of African-American communities around the country. And this was before COVID, right? Before COVID, which we know is impacting Black and Brown and immigrant bodies more than others. And they're like, what are the issues that most impact you? And it turns out those issues that African-American voters care about the most: healthcare, the economy, police reform. I mean, these are things that all Americans care about, right? And yet they're things that impact and affect the Black community more than others. We can say both things at once. We can hold both things at the same time, and we must if we're going to win. We must resist the urge to only see vice president or a vice presidential candidate like Kamala Harris as a Black woman, right? Like, there is more to her than just that identity. Absolutely, it is historic. We should not downplay how historic that is. But to truly be anti-racist, to truly be for liberation, I think means fighting for actual police reform, fighting for defunding the police, fighting against some of the policies that maybe Kamala Harris in the past supported, and holding her accountable. The BLM movement isn't fighting to have Amazon have a playlist that says Black stories on it. All right. This is not about, just changing, shuffling the chairs on the Titanic here. Right. And I think we always have to remember that, and we have to hold Democrats accountable, and we have to hold our left brothers and sisters accountable when they're trying to pass off class politics and run roughshod over women and people of color and working class women. That is why I love Matriarch PAC, and I don't know how long I should continue on for. I'm sure I was like, give me the light. I'm a comic. But I will say that in order to defeat fascism, we need to hold all these things at once. We need to stop being so siloed. We need to understand that the Democratic Party needs to be held accountable. We need to talk about their donors as well. Nancy Pelosi in Manolo Blahnik's ain't it. She ain't it. That being said, shall we attack her over her gender? No, absolutely not. That's ridiculous. It's silly. You guys, I'm a stand-up comedian, and sometimes I don't have all the answers, and so when I don't, I just say I'm a stand-up comic. But I will say thank you, everybody. Thank you for listening. Thank you for being here. Thank you, Matriarch PAC. Thank you. I hope this SoundCloud rapper did an okay job following a legend like Barbara Smith. And it's so good to be in this company. Thanks.
Francesca Fiorentini, sometimes you have to have comics on to say what those in politics still, even if you're progressive, may be limited and can't say, or if you're an author or a speaker, it's good to have comics in the room to say the Manolo Blahnik comment, the ice cream comments.
I'm not backed by any nonprofit. It's I am safe.
Francesca, we are so grateful to have you in our orbit, because you're not just a comic, you are a journalist, and you are an activist, like a hardcore activist, and I think that's important to recognize as well. So it's good to have you've got the whole thing going for you.
Thank you so much.
All right, our next speaker has an incredible story. She is a teacher. She taught in elementary school and middle school for years. She was an activist in her community in Long Island, fighting against a type of testing that is very unpopular with working class and teachers in New York State. She has been a teacher's advocate for decades, a union organizer. She's also an environmental activist. And in 2016, she was a Bernie Sanders delegate and was so motivated by what was happening that she ended up running for office a few months after Donald Trump won in a Trump district. She ran for the assembly, and everyone said, Christine, what are you doing? Trump won by 20 points here. How are you going to win in Long Island, in Red Long Island, where Trump does these rallies? And she said, I'm going to do it because I know that my district has more teachers than anywhere else in this state. And I know even if the Republicans, I know that they believe in fully funding our public schools. And within a few months in a special election of Trump winning the presidency in 2016, in 2017, Christine Pellegrino was elected, flipping that district 40 points and becoming an assembly member in New York. Now she's running for New York State Senate, and we are so honored to have her on the board of Matriarch as one of our state leaders in New York State, Christine Pellegrino.
Hi, everyone. This is Christine Pellegrino, former New York State Assemblywoman, candidate for the New York State Senate. I'm so proud of Matriarch for organizing this inaugural summit. I'm so proud to be on the board of Matriarch, an organization of women who support progressive working class women that run for office just like me. Because now, more than ever, we need more women in office to build a future for our kids and our planet. We need working class women who understand the struggles of our people and our communities. Women who fight hard for the solutions that center the most vulnerable, who choose people over profits. We need women who will organize for equality and justice and solidarity of sisterhood. Because when we do that, we will have a fundamentally better government that works for all of us. I wish you a wonderful summit. Thank you.
Thank you, Christine Pellegrino. One of the things that we want to highlight is Christine is running for state senate in New York, and New York just took back their state senate. Despite voting for Democrats, they actually had this thing called the IDC, where there were 8 Democrats caucusing with Republicans, and they were voted out 2 years ago after a few decades. So the Democrats finally took control of the Senate, and why that's important is because this IDC group was siding with big real estate developers who are making New York City and New York State unequal, but also they were siding with the privatization of public schools and sucking the funds out of public schools. And so what it means to not only elect Christine to the Senate doesn't just give the Democrats a supermajority with her seat, but it also brings an actual real-life teacher into the Senate to prioritize those issues. So go check out ChristinePellegrino.com. She's in the final days, and we're hoping that she can flip that district because she is running against a Republican, I forgot to mention. We're hoping to flip that district green. We're going to take a quick break, and we are going to be back with our next slate of guests. Welcome back. You are watching the inaugural Matriarch Summit. And if you're not able to watch live, don't worry. Or if you had to check out, you can take this link and you can watch it this weekend or even after the election. It's a busy weekend. And of course, we're going to be sharing a lot of these great speeches publicly and to our Matriarch universe. If you are not part of our Matriarch universe, please join us at matriarchpack.com. Next year, we have some incredible events planned. We are going to be doing trainings and guided work. But this is a summit about feminism in class and what that means in this election, which is just a few days away, and what it means with whoever our president is and how we organize so that the majority of working people and women in particular who are on the front lines of this economy are prioritized. Tara Houska is a tribal attorney. She's the founder of the, hope I say this right, GNU Collective, and a former advisor on Native American affairs to Bernie Sanders. She spent 6 months on the front lines fighting the Dakota Access Pipeline and is currently engaged in the movement to defund fossil fuels, of course, and a years-long struggle against Enbridge's Line 3 pipeline. She is co-founder of Not Your Mascots, a group committed to positive representation of Native speakers. Tara, thank you so much for joining us. We are very grateful to have you on our advisors and to be speaking today.
Oh, miigwech for the time and the space. Really appreciate it. Am I supposed to just go right in?
All yours. The floor is yours.
All mine? Okay. Mbuju ginawa, minawa, dinamay maganadak, shabaway kwa indigenous cause, makwa and dudame, gojijing and dunjaba, skigmizigigi siswa piningi tabishka. My name is Tara Houska. I'm Bear Clan from Couchiching First Nation. And I'm actually calling in from the shore of Lake Superior, one of our beautiful, powerful Great Lakes that we are trying to defend and protect. I'm sitting in a car right now because I actually just got done doing a water ceremony with a bunch of women by the side of Lake Superior and also at one of the proposed Line 3 worksite locations where they've brought in a series of trailers housing the workers that are set to build Line 3 is a massive tar sands pipeline coming out of Alberta. So we were just putting down our blessings and our prayers at one of the man camps. I know that the topic is class and feminism. I was thinking about that today and yesterday and leading up to this. Feminism is always a hard one for me to wrap my mind around just because our people, Anishinaabe people, are matriarchal people. And feminism is a concept that it's just something that's ingrained deeply into our systems of the balancing the masculine and the feminine. It is a balancing act. And right now, with the way that we see things happening and all these changes that are occurring in nature and occurring among the people and these uprisings that we're seeing in this narrative of violence against the earth, violence against each other, is a recognition and a reflection of that imbalance, the imbalance of the masculine and the feminine, of life and death, and of our place in the universe. I would say it's an ongoing struggle for the indigenous peoples of the world, really, as people of the land, people of these beautiful places, these last beautiful places, that we are protecting what's left. We're protecting the sacred, and we are on the front lines of so many different crises, whether it's climate crises or brutality by law enforcement, by the state, by lack of representation in the larger governance systems and in the greater societal narrative that has dispossessed and disenfranchised so many. Throughout all these different movements that I see across Turtle Island, but also largely across the world, as land defenders, as people who are on these created front lines, really, of defending what's left of our beautiful biodiversity and those spaces, one theme that seems to be consistent is that these movements are always led by women. They're led by women. They're led by two-spirit, by non-gendered, by the people who have a more balanced perspective on what life is and what life means. And it's that kind of leadership that I think is, it seems like it's trying to bring it back into balance. That we're seeing all these different non-traditional, quote unquote, voices and power and spirits in different spaces, whether that's, federal, local, state, tribal government, or whether that's at the forefront of movements and the centering of those voices and the centering of a different set of values, a set of values that reflects care in a different way, instead of just looking at the dollars and cents and the, how do we balance an economy and continue on this system that's obviously killing so many people around the world. How do we create economies that actually reflect what care means? How do we be well with each other? How do we have healthy, happy people? Because regardless of whatever the economic structure is, unless we are healthy and we are, grounded in who we are and we have purpose, then we are creating economies that are deeply, deeply disparate in their treatment of different types of people, and leave a lot of people out, and leave these same systems continuing on the way that they are. I think when it comes to the issue of class, you got 5% of the world's indigenous people holding 80% of the world's biodiversity. We're the people that are almost across the board not at the table. We're on the table. Our places are on the table. They don't necessarily know that, it's more like a resource, or we need this copper, we need this oil to go through your pipe, go through your territory. We need these trees, we need this lumber, we need, it's more like a conversation about that. But I think as we're seeing what's happening and watching the world change around us, that there are more folks that are waking up to different ways of living, different ways of being, different ways of thinking. And that includes balancing the masculine and the feminine in a real way. That includes looking at what an oligarchy does to people. What does that really result in? Does it result in a situation where our most oppressed are being treated with respect? No. I think I like to use the analogy of, Native people being the canary in the mine of humanity. What is it? Whenever I see a country that's supposed to be so great and so amazing and so powerful and has all these amazing things that it gives its people, how does it treat its indigenous people? How does it treat its Black folks? How does it treat its houseless folks? How does it treat the people that are forgotten, or else maybe not forgotten, but oppressed or disregarded? We can't be great as a nation unless we are great with one another and we treat one another with empathy and with equity. I am deeply grateful to be part of the advisory board of Matriarch and to see the uplifting of so many different women across Turtle Island. I'm grateful to see this change in a narrative and in a fabric of, we're going to center, instead of just sticking to these same extractive-based economies, these patriarchal narratives that we're pushing back, and we're saying, no, it needs to be more balanced. It needs to include, quote unquote, BIPOC. It needs to include LGBTQA. It needs to include all these voices and these people that we need to hear from. I think that there's a lot of opportunity for growth. And I see this rising kind of happening, right? We saw it over the summer with George Floyd. We saw it in the streets and in the cities all over the United States of people that had had enough, and people that were tired of the same old, and people that were also reacting to a pandemic keeping us all inside, and also keeping us in a lot of ways like together. We're apart, but we're together, right? We have this moment of reflection and thought, where does my food come from? Where does my water come from? How do I take care of my family when I can't be with them? How do I take care of my neighbors when I can't physically be there? What do we do in that instance? And, what is my relationship with this earth and with my relatives that are living with us, whether it's two-legged, four-legged, winged, fish. We have this moment of trying to figure that out. And I see that happening, that rising happening. And when I see something like a matriarch or a group or a diverse coalition of people that are trying to push for something more, it gives me so much hope to see that and to be part of that. So, I'm very hopeful, and I'm certainly hopeful when I see our movements being led, not just by women, but also by young people, and by young people that are not willing to accept the status quo as it is, and they're willing to challenge that status quo up front, and to use their clarity of thought and their lack of corruption and compromise to say it like it is, and to empower one another. It's a really powerful time to be in, and I'm deeply grateful to share the space with all of you, and wish you well in all of your journeys and your efforts across your life and all the lives that you touch. So, miigwech, deeply appreciate it.
Thank you, Tara. Tara, I'm so grateful that you mentioned matriarch and matriarchy in Indigenous communities, because when we were thinking about what we wanted to call this, there's a PAC, there's another entity that does organizing. This is really about building a matriarch movement. We look to Indigenous communities, and just my personal work going to Standing Rock, where you were for 6 months, and seeing how so many movements and revolutions were led by women who were often not out, they were in front, but they weren't necessarily highlighted. And so this is a sisterhood, and even though we're all virtual right now, we're just so grateful to have you part of our sisterhood. And our next guest is actually someone who was part of this class of candidates, part of our sisterhood. She ran for Congress in Massachusetts. Her name is Assan Laki. She's an immigrant from Morocco. She's a former Wall Street regulator and ran for office in Massachusetts' 4th District, which was most recently held by Congressman Kennedy, who, of course, was in a primary against Senator Jeff Merkley. We are so grateful. I think she's coming to the screen right now. We're just waiting. She's not there yet, so that's okay. I'll do a quick plug for Matriarch. This is how it rolls. We don't have the stage anymore where we can just pull somebody up from the audience. So for those of you who don't know about Matriarch, we had this extraordinary class of candidates who had primaries. Pretty much they all started as soon as the pandemic started. Our first candidate, Morgan Harper in Ohio, she ran and she's getting close, days away from her primary, and then the pandemic hit. And so suddenly her election date changed. It was crazy. Her election date changed. She had to change her organizing strategy. They couldn't knock on doors. We didn't have an understanding of how the pandemic functioned. Of course, we have a better understanding, but not fully yet, and that was Morgan Harper. And then Nabila Islam, who ran in Georgia, she was running for Congress, and she also had her election date changed and had changed her organizing. And as the campaigns grew, as we got a little bit more understanding of the pandemic, we understood how to adjust our tactics. Folks had to invest a lot of money online. They were still in the middle of fundraising and organizing, and they had to build online organizing communities. But it was tough. I mean, this is important to state because, the establishment has a lot of money, and so they could throw that money around online. They could buy television ads that the progressive working class candidates in the matriarch slate couldn't do. So it really was a tremendous amount of work, and Assan Laki had one of those later later elections, but she learned a lot of tactics, came in very close. And, overall, it was a sisterhood. We built a sisterhood. And so when we didn't know the answers, because nobody knew, we have some of the most extraordinary campaign organizers in the world who are on our board of advisors who were winging it. Because how do you organize? How do you run a grassroots campaign in the middle of a pandemic? We're going to go to Assan in just a second. We're just waiting to connect the audio, so let's just go to a quick break. And if you're not following Matriarch, make sure to check us out on Twitter and make sure to subscribe on YouTube, because starting next year, we're going to be producing more content here on YouTube. And we're going to have candidates and a lot of our board of advisors giving trainings on YouTube. That is in the coming year, next year, 2021. But without further ado, we have Assan Laki. You look so well slept since the last time I saw you. Assan, of course, just finished up a run for Congress. The floor is yours. We have done an introduction. We're grateful to have you here.
My goodness, Nomiki, thank you so much for having me. And hello, everyone. Good evening. I'm Assan Laki, former matriarch candidate for Congress in Massachusetts 4th District. And I want to first really thank you and thank Matriarch for all that you've done for our campaign. You believed in me since day one, and I would tell you that is rare, because for women like me, being an immigrant from Morocco, being a Muslim woman, being a woman of color, somebody with slight accent after working hard for so long, not come from insider politics or insider donors. Having organizations like Matriarch believe in us since the beginning is huge, and it really sets that mantle for us to build and go forward. So I'm very proud of the work that we were able to accomplish. Right now, we definitely are afraid. Many of us are. We have heightened anxiety, and many of us are working so hard to get Trump out of office and next an administration that can have a listening ear for us, where we can actually have dialogue and continue to fight for Medicare for all, for the Green New Deal, for getting corporate money out of politics, for 15, for labor unions, and more and more. And so to me, I'm going to be casting my vote on November 3rd. And I'm doing that intentionally because I know that there are who are still, sorry, my dog's in the background, are folks out there who are still undecided, who are still thinking that their vote might not matter in this election. And I am telling them that it does more than ever. That it is, for many who are feeling that they didn't get what they want. I am telling you, I've had a whole long life of not getting what I want, but I always believed in what I can do and what I can accomplish. And this time around, it's about giving our democracy a chance to see another day so that we can continue this battle forward. So I wanted to thank you again so much for making this space, Nomiki, and for Matriarch, and for all who are showing up tonight to say, continue the movement for progressives, continue the movement for the people, and take it from me, because I fought on behalf of the American people as a Wall Street regulator. I fought the biggest corrupt corporate players on Wall Street on your behalf, and knew that there is way more power in the streets. So I took on activism and learned so much more about what the American people need and demand to have a life with dignity. And I decided, you know what? I'm not going to be a bystander. I am going to take all this energy and run forward. And we'll do it again and again and again until we have that government that is truly representative of our diversity and of our unity. Thank you.
Assan, thank you so much for having the courage to run. It is, as I know, as so many other of our candidates and our board members know, It is a human sacrifice. It's a personal sacrifice. It is a human sacrifice. Oftentimes you're sacrificing your family time, you're sacrificing your financial interests, you're sacrificing your health care. You may not be able to pay your student loans. You may go into debt, and that's the stuff that you expect. There's so many other things that you don't expect, like the establishment blocking you, coming after you, and coming out on the other side. And I see you, and I hope I'm speaking on behalf of everybody else. I think I am, that you look fresh, you look full of energy, and we can't wait to see your next fight. And we're grateful to have you in our sisterhood.
Thank you so much, Nomiki. I appreciate you and appreciate everyone.
Thank you. All right. After this quick little break, we are going into the next half of the Matriarch Summit. You definitely want to stick around because this is the What We Do section. This is where we talk to Jane McAlevey, who is a world-renowned author and organizer. She advises some of the biggest unions and most unions all across the world. And she has written about how to organize, how to fight for democracy, and how to block all that busting that happens, not just in unions, but in movements. So you want to stick around for that. And then following that, you got to stick around because we're going to talk about what to do in the face of a coup, which I think personally, I'm saying this, we're underway. And then after that, we're closing out with the one and only Cori Bush, but there are many speeches until then, so you want to stick around right after. I'm going to go to a quick little break. All right, welcome back. Jane McAlevey is an organizer, an author, and scholar. She is currently a senior policy fellow at the University of California at Berkeley's Labor Center, part of the Institute for Labor and Employment Relationships. Her third book, A Collective Bargain, Unions, Organizing, and the Fight for Democracy, argues that despite, if not because, of the withering attacks on working people from the Supreme Court, conservative state and local governments, and the corporate class, the survival of American democracy depends on rebuilding unions. She is also the author of Raising Expectations and Raising Hell, and that was labeled, by the way, the most valuable book of 2012 by Nation magazine. And she's also the author of No Shortcuts, Organizing for Power in the New Gilded Age. My goodness, that's just a couple of things. But, from my perspective, I think that Jane McAlevey is one of the brightest minds, if not the brightest mind, when it comes to organizing and taking on power and leveraging your own power in the world that we live in today. Jane, the floor is yours.
Thank you, Nomiki. It's great to be here. It's great to share the Matriarch stage with so many powerful women. It's really a delight. And I actually think there's nothing more important right now than us getting more working class women into office. And one thing that's so strange about this moment is that I always feel like I have to say the multiracial working class because there's been such a bizarre use of the term working class by the mainstream media to somehow make that equal like a white guy in a hard hat. So whenever I say working class, I'm talking about a multiracial working class organization. So I'm delighted to be here. I want to say a few things. I want to chat about a few things. Some of my favorite words have come up already today from your earlier speakers. Strike, I believe was said several times by the one and only Sarah Nelson. And then, listening to Barbara Smith was phenomenal, going back to the history of an architect of many of the central issues that Matriarch is sort of diving into as you try to build an alternative platform for working class women to take office. So I want to start on a couple of premises. One is, when you think about the idea of the 99% and women, and that a majority of voters are women, and there's so many statistics that back up the idea that we should just be in power. So how come we aren't, right? If the 99% is in fact the 99%, and if women make up this huge percentage of the electorate, what's the problem? So as an organizer, who's run political campaigns in addition to trade union campaigns, I want to back up for a minute and talk about how they stay in power, and then what we do to overcome that, right? Which is sort of the point of Matriarch, one of the points of Matriarch. So when I think about the sort of potential power of women, and also just the 99% in general, right? Class, feminism, race, gender, intersectional conversation, what I'm keenly aware of every day, and I think we all are today in this country, is that the 1% rules by dividing us, right? Division is the game that's played, like divide and conquer, and division is, I think, the chief weapon of the 1% and how they keep us down, divided, indebted, and fighting each other instead of actually with the eye on the prize and dislodging them from the structures of power that they hold. And it's part of why I am a trade unionist and why I work in the trade union movement. I do feel that my life experience is primarily with healthcare workers. And healthcare workers are primarily women and women of color. And so I almost forget there's any other trade union movement besides like two organizations, educators, teachers, who I work a lot with, and healthcare workers, because they're overwhelmingly women. And they're both overwhelmingly women of color. And so for me, when I wake up every morning, I think about the work. I think I'm in this really great position because the people I work with are already basically working class, multiracial women who are figuring out together what it takes to, one, build unity, two, build really powerful, what we call worksite structure that then enables them to actually win the kind of radical changes in their lives that most women only dream of fighting to win on. And it's part of why I think trade unions matter so much. So to me, a good trade union functions in many ways as an electoral function, not just something that's going to help you win, better wages and working conditions and dignity on the job. So right now, I think one thing that most people don't realize is that 47% of all unionized workers, just to underscore this, 47% of all unionized workers in the United States are women. And I think probably by a year or two from now, that number might even slip over into majority. In fact, in Canada, it's 53% right now, right? Just above us in Canada. So when I think of the trade union movement these days, despite whatever image the media gives it, I want everyone here to think of the trade union movement as functionally a woman and women of color sort of class-based movement. And it's increasingly so. If you look at the industries that are growing in the United States, they're ones that are dominated by women and women of color. Just a fact. Again, healthcare is an explosive sector of the U.S. economy. And so what's interesting and dynamic about the new and growing portions of the U.S. trade union movement is that in my life experience, working with mostly women who are often women of color in what I call mission-driven sectors of the U.S. economy, education, and healthcare, I see very little separation in how women approach trade union work between wages and working conditions at work, and then the fight for childcare, dignity, rent stabilization, rent regulation, rent rules, affordable housing, childcare, an end to toxic poisoning in the backyard, and a whole set of issues. And why is that? I think it's because the history of class and power and gender in this country has sort of made it so that the traditional trade union movement of last century, dominated mostly by men, set up a dynamic in this country where trade unions for the first sort of 50, 60, 70 years, or the domination of the last century, they sort of had this this wall between the idea of what you worried about and thought about when you left work and went home and what you thought about when you were at work. And for a largely women workforce, you just don't do that. Women don't sort their brain like, when I'm at work, I care about wages and dignity. And when I go home, I care about, can we pay the rent and feed the kids and have good health care? So part of what's so exciting about the future of the trade union movement right now is that it's very female dominated, and there's a huge integration and intersection of the issues that are regularly coming up in discussions about what is it we want to win. Like you'll say, what do you want? If you could change three things in the process of fighting for a collective bargaining for a contract, most women will say things like, well, is there a way to deal with the rent, through a union contract? Well, yeah, there is. It's to join Matriarch and actually elect a bunch of women, working class women, to your city council, your state legislature, and to Congress, right? So that actually we understand there's a direct relationship between how much money you earn and then how much it costs to pay the rent. So I think that's part of what's very, very, very exciting about the trade union movement right now, which is often dismissed as last century or an old idea or something like that. So the integrated perspective that women bring into the trade union movement leads to an integrated agenda that I think you're going to see increasingly as the trade union movement moves forward. And I want to give a couple of examples of what a trade union allows women to do in terms of building power. And this is a little section from the new book, which Namiki so nicely mentioned, my latest book, A Collective Bargain. And there's a little section I have called Unions Are Sexist. It's a section of the book where I'm trying to take on and challenge a bunch of myths. And in this section, I'm literally telling a story about waking up one morning in New York City, and the date was April 10th, 2018. And I'm listening to WNYC, right, to NPR, to the national news in the morning. And it was lost on me that April 10th of 2018 was what's called Equal Pay Day, right, which is this big sort of advocacy idea in the United States that we track how many days into the next year it takes before women earn the same amount of pay as the average man earned in the United States of America. So April 10th, 2018 was the average day, but really that means white women, by the way, like when white women actually catch up to what men made on December 31st the year before. So it's April 10th. And I wake up and there's this whole discussion going on NPR, right, in the liberal media, in the media that we're meant to turn to. And when I wake up and there's a discussion going on and there's a reporter named Shamita Basu, and she's interviewing someone from the Equal Pay Today campaign. And they're having this discussion that pay transparency is an act in Congress that they've proposed, right? It's a congressional measure so that employers must publish and make available to workers, what everyone gets paid. So I'm waiting for them to get to the fact that in a trade union, not only do you know what everyone else gets paid because you have a union contract, but actually you fight for and set the terms of what your pay and benefits are if you're a woman with a trade union. So this conversation about women and pay transparency, we're like 3 or 4 minutes in. It's a huge feature story that morning. And they get to the end of it, and this is what the reporter says. She appeals to listeners and she says, if you work somewhere where you and your coworkers know at least roughly what each other makes, call and tell us how you learned that information. Is it company policy? Did you figure it out through informal channels? Please leave us a voicemail. First off, I don't even want to let you know how long the voicemail I left was that day for NPR, but it was long. And second of all, what was fascinating to me, as I say in the book, is that there was literally no mention of the word union, not once, not ever in the entire conversation. And to me, it was a pretty fascinating example of the class challenge in a movement, which is why I think Matriarch matters so much. And I went on to write a story about a worker named Marie Celestine. And I want to tell the story for a minute in terms of power, class power, gender, race, and how we win. Marie Celestine was a worker in a hospital in Philadelphia in 2016. I was serving as the chief negotiator for the contract effort that she had worked very hard with a group of nurses, 1,000 nurses in her hospital, to form their first trade union ever. And because of the power of what a union contract does, she had the right through the union contract to request, we all did, to request information from the employer that tells us all of the pay, something apparently NPR still hasn't learned because they repeated the same story this year, a different version of it. So we have the right, once women form a union, it's like a 90% women's bargaining, what we'd call a bargaining unit, right? It's women, nurses in a hospital. So they go through an incredibly intense campaign, they form a union. We do a negotiation survey. What do you want to win? How do you want to transform your life? This is where power starts to come in, right? And then because of the history of trade unions, we have the right to request information from the employer. So we get the information back. We're going into a bargaining session one day, and there's this incredible nurse named Marie Celestine who is like salt of the earth, dynamite. She's an older nurse. She had a lot of respect from the younger nurses around her. She's a Black woman. And she had been there for about 47 years at that point. She was one of the most senior nurses, both in age and tenure in the hospital. And Marie Celestine, we created an Excel spreadsheet when we got the data back from the employer about what the pay is, what each worker got paid. Almost all women, what did they all get paid? Handful of men, right, in the nursing division, but not usually, not many. And so this is the power of collective bargaining in the contract. So we get to the point where we have an Excel spreadsheet built that shows each worker, you can put your name in and what do you get paid? And you can see what the average pay range is from people in your unit and all around you. And so Marie Celestine, a Black woman, comes up to the table to ask, how does my pay compare to everybody else around me? And we have the unfortunate reality in that moment of telling her she's many dollars behind a lot of young white nurses who had been hired in after her. I mean, she's many dollars behind nurses who had just been hired, and she's been there for like 47 years. And I literally watch as her head is like exploding in this conversation, and she begins to realize that she was essentially never getting the quote unquote merit raises. That was the system the hospital had before the union. And as the story goes, Marie Celestine winds up going from being this very quiet nurse involved in forming a union to this extraordinary speaker in a negotiation session one day where she stands up to tell the story of how little she's being paid compared to white counterparts and male counterparts in her union, in her unit, who are doing the same kind of work as her. And fast forward, not only does she find her voice in the process, but you fast forward, and actually what she winds up winning is 100% not just pay transparency, as the story on NPR about Equal Pay Day was discussing. She doesn't just win the right to know that she's getting a shitbag bunch of pay. She winds up winning a contract with a wage scale that gives her an extraordinary raise, that places her on a wage scale that respects her experience, her years of experience, her time there, and her skill. And in one first contract in Philadelphia in 2016, this group of 1,000 nurses creates a completely transparent, totally fair pay system that they wrote, they fought for, they almost went on strike for, and they won. And that, to me, is why we need to have working class women like the Marie Celestines of the world, part of the Matriarch pipeline, so that we are taking women who are finding their voice in trade union fights, learning really important skills about what it takes to fight and win, and then elevating them into public office. Because I got to tell you, I would love to see what Marie Celestine would do if she was on the city council and trying to drive the same kind of policy agenda that she drove in really extraordinary ways in her trade union. So I'm excited about Matriarch. I'm sort of newer to the Matriarch idea. I'm delighted to know about it. I'm delighted to be contributing to Matriarch. And I'm delighted to think about not just how do we put working class women into office, but I think the thing we need to think a lot about concurrently is what does it take to create the power platform and build the power around women that we put in office so that they can actually then implement the agenda that we need desperately in this country. And I want to just close this by saying that when you look at the story I just told you about Marie Celestine, when you look at the structure of trade unions, that when we win, when we take office, so Marie Celestine fought with 1,000 nurses to form her first union. It was hard as hell to win that election. That's an election. They're really hard to win in this country. I'm going to argue they're harder than most civic elections, right? Although nowadays with Trump and lunatic people who are in control, it's as divisive and polarized. But trade union elections are always divisive and always polarizing, and you've got to build huge unity in order just to win the election. But that's only the first step in a trade union campaign. And the next most important thing that has to happen is actually building even more unity and building the power, which is ultimately through a strike, but building the power to then win the agenda that you formed the union for. So my closing comments for today, for my excitement about Matriarch, is we have to put more working class women into office. Good job, you're doing it already. So exciting, who's going to be on for the rest of the day today. But we also then have to understand what it takes to build a platform of power that actually enables the policy changes. And I'm going to argue that has a lot to do with building a more robust, stronger trade union movement concurrently with structures like Matriarch. So I'm delighted to be here. I hope that insight into the fact that in the trade union movement, you don't just ask your boss how much everyone gets paid to be told no. You actually set your damn pay, and we're going to have women, when Matriarch elects a whole lot more of them, do that all over the country. Good to be here.
Jane, thank you so much. Where's the applause? I need like a an applause track for you. This is the perfect message because as we said at the top, Matriarch was formed to transform the conversation around issues related to women, but in this moment in particular, with the economic crisis that we're facing and COVID, and seeing who's on the front lines and seeing nurses, teachers, flight attendants. These are unions that are women-led and majority women. And as we don't know what's going to happen in this election in a few days, but there's a chance that the results could be contested or not. And there's so much power in the unions, as depleted as they are and under attack as they've been. There's so much power in them in pushing back and advocating for a rightful democratic resolution to this election, and then, of course, pressuring whoever's in charge to make sure that all of these women on the front lines, their concerns are addressed. And so we hope to have more Cori Bushes out there in Congress fighting as a nurse for women on the front lines who've been affected by COVID and this economy. And I just think this is a perfect transition for our next guest. And thank you, Jane. We're very grateful for your work, and we hope to do much more with you. Perfect transition, because our next guest is also a board of advisor of Matriarch, Javonka Beckles. She's currently a candidate for the AC Transit District Board of Directors to represent Ward 1 in California. She is a movement organizer, a former two-term Richmond City Council member, a longtime leader in the Richmond Progressive Alliance, a children's mental health professional. This is how I got to know her, a former candidate for California's 15th State Assembly District, and a democratic socialist in tradition of Martin Luther King Jr. Javonka, we are so grateful to have you here, and the floor is yours.
All right. Well, thank you, Nomiki. Can you hear me?
You sound great.
Good. Okay, wonderful. Well, good afternoon, everyone. Good afternoon, Nomiki. Good afternoon to all the amazing, phenomenal women that have joined this summit. Wow, I'm so honored to be part of this really powerful lineup of women. The topic of class and feminism is one that we could spend days discussing, and we still would have only scratched the surface of this extremely complicated set of issues with multiple perspectives, depending on a number of factors, including age, relative privilege, life experience, ethnicity, culture, and so much more. But for the purpose of this discussion, I'll say that if you care about sexism, misogyny, you should care about classism. As a group, women have lesser earning power, resulting in lower economic standing, which results in less power and autonomy in our lives. Women of color face higher rates of poverty than white women and are twice as likely to be in poverty. Many of us are familiar with the statistics that white women earn in the range of 77 cents to the dollar a white man makes. Proportionately, Black women earn approximately 64 cents, and Latinx women earn about 53 cents. Single women have a greater need for a second income than most men. According to the article I read in Everyday Feminism, I quote this, women become more dependent on partners and social systems to meet their financial needs. Single women have a greater need than men for a second income, which means less time for leisure, self-care, and smashing the patriarchy, end quote. Well, that's exactly why we need more women in office. We need more women in office to create legislation that brings about more parity for us. Simply put, caring about class and caring about other forms of oppression are often falsely put in competition with each other to distract us and to divide us for the benefit of the predominantly white supremacist patriarchy that seeks to continue to oppress women, that seeks to continue to oppress poor people, that continues to oppress women, Black and indigenous people of color, and many other groups for their benefit. We know all forms of injustice are interconnected and can and should be parsed. We can agree or disagree about which came first and which is most harmful, right? We can definitely do that. But frankly, as a Black working class woman, that's not a discussion I have the luxury of simply entertaining on an intellectual level. I do know that we can't understand the oppression of women and non-binary folks separately from class exploitation any more than we can understand either of those things independently of racism and white supremacy. Feminism, by definition, is more than simply equal rights for women. Feminism is more than simply equal rights for women, as I said. So what I want to do is I want to quote our esteemed feminist scholar and author, Bell Hooks. Bell Hooks said, "To be feminist in any authentic sense of the term is to want for all people, female and male, liberation from sexist role patterns, domination and oppression," end quote. This statement was made about 40 years ago, and we're still working to achieve parity and power and autonomy in a patriarchal system that feels more threatened now more than ever. A meaningful and effective feminist movement needs to address economic, racial, gender, and environmental injustice together. They didn't happen in the second wave. That didn't really happen in the second wave of the feminist movement. So it is daunting and necessary at the same time, though it is. We see it happening now in more intersectional circles. So it's hard to work, and it's not gonna happen overnight. I think we can all agree on that. It will continue to have to fight every single day. I'm a founding member of an organization, a newly formed organization called Women in Politics in Richmond. We formed this group here after the shocking 2018 city council election that resulted in an all-male city council. 2020, we have an all-male city council. But we are a multicultural, multi-ethnic, intergenerational group of self-identified women who came together last year. We support and promote self-identifying women candidates and allies who share our values for equity in community and beyond. This is significant because as a group, we fundamentally recognize that no ism stands alone. We know we need to reject this lean-in feminism of rich white women who are more concerned with diversifying corporate boardrooms and increasing representation than actually helping the vast majority of women. Poverty, lack of healthcare, job insecurity, the effects of climate change. These things are especially likely to impact women and non-binary folks in general, and Black and Indigenous women and non-binary folks in particular. In particular. So what do we need to do? We need to fight to rebuild the labor movement. We need to win Medicare for all. We need a Green New Deal to ensure a just transition to a sustainable economy and good union jobs for all. We need to guarantee housing and free, high quality public education as human rights. These things are popular and they'll benefit the whole working class, especially women and people of color. But if we're going to build a strong movement, we need to address the particular oppressions that historically marginalized groups face. That means fighting against racial, gender, and sexual discrimination and harassment in the workplace. That means defending reproductive rights, demanding an end to deportation and detention of immigrants. That means defunding police and dismantling the system of mass incarceration that locks up Black people at horrific rates. In short, we have to build an inclusive, multiracial, working class movement that truly sees that an injury to one is an injury to all. That's why I'm running for the AC Transit Board, which oversees the public service for 1.5 million people in California's East Bay. Believe it or not, public transit is the heart of struggles around economic, racial, and environmental justice. The AC Transit bus service primarily serves working class people of color. Almost 2/3 of the riders are low income and 75% are non-white. The public bus service has also been a major source of good union jobs for working class people of color. ATU, which is ATU 192, represents the AC Transit drivers and mechanics, have an 80% Black membership. And so, we see here how all of our issues, right, connect. But getting back to public transit, it's currently in danger. Ridership is way down due to the pandemic, and billionaire privatizers and corporate politicians want to use this as an excuse to cut budgets and service. Meanwhile, rideshare companies like Uber and Lyft are working to replace public transit while pouring millions of dollars into Proposition 22 to legalize the shameful exploitation of their workers. All of these things threaten working class women and non-binary people of color most. I'm running for AC Transit Board because the transit workers of ATU 192 asked me to run because they know that public transportation shouldn't be moving backwards in the middle of a pandemic and an economic depression. Fighting climate change and inequality means fighting to defend and expand public transit and to make it free for all riders. And with greed and gridlock paralyzing Congress, we'll need to build a Green New Deal in state houses and city halls, starting with an expanded fare free transit system. We can fund it. We can do it with taxes on corporations and the ultra rich, right? Tax the rich. It's a simple statement that is so powerful and would make such a huge difference in the lives of the rest of us, the 99%. But this fight is bigger than public transit. It's about standing with workers and fighting for the public services that the working class deserves. It's about building a movement to take the ultra rich, to take them on, rather, to take back our wealth and give our planet a fighting chance. This is the kind of feminist movement that we need. I'm so proud to be building it with all of the amazing women speaking here today. I'm honored to have been asked to be a speaker. And, I believe that with this movement, as our sister Barbara said, an anti-racist feminist movement, we can create the kinds of policies that all of us benefit from when we have more working class women in elected office. Thank you so much. I appreciate the opportunity to be a part of this.
Thank you, Javonka. We are so excited about your campaign, and really, I think what you said about our transit system and how it really highlights the inequities, because of course, as a New Yorker myself, the transit is the lifeblood of the city. If you can't get to work on time, you might lose your wages, or worse, your job. You may not have to get to your kids. You may have to pay extra time for taking care of those kids. And of course, when the transit system is broken and cities become more unaffordable, people are driven further and further away. So it just drives up that inequity. And of course, women are on the front lines. So thank you so much. This is what it takes. It takes real activists to go into office to prioritize these issues and remind folks that we, the working class and the poor, are paying for these broken systems when they could be fully funded by those who are literally exploiting our work and the taxpayers' dollars. So thank you for your work.
Thank you. Thank you.
All right. Well, it is Election Day on Tuesday, as we all know, if you didn't know already. And there is a unique situation happening. We have been here before, I would say, in 2000, but it's a little bit different this time around because we have a president who has declared that he may not accept the results of this election. And he has asked far right-wing extremists to stand guard, and people are right-wing extremists, hate groups are mobilizing across this country. So we may be facing a coup, or we may be in the midst of a coup. And that is why we asked Eileen Flanagan to join. She is the trainings coordinator for Choose Democracy, which in recent weeks has trained over, and I mean recent weeks, has trained over 6,000 people to thwart a coup. She's an award-winning author, online teacher, and a trainer in nonviolent direct action. As board chair of Earthquaker Action Team, she helped shape and execute the strategy that pushed a $4 billion a year bank to stop investing in mountaintop removal coal mining. And she co-founded the Power of Local Green Jobs campaign. Eileen, thank you so much for joining us, and we're very excited to hear about the work that you're doing on the ground in thwarting this coup.
Thank you. I'm so excited to be here and so heartened by all the messages from all the amazing women about the intersection of issues and the connection between all the issues. That really, really rings true to me. And I'm thrilled that you're inviting Choose Democracy on, because we know that if all issues hit working class women, and especially women of color, harder, that's going to be especially true of a coup. All of the issues that have been named tonight, from climate change to fair wages, transportation, healthcare, all of it is threatened if we have an illegal power grab. And so what happened this summer was some nonviolent trainers started thinking, like, this doesn't look good. We've never actually had a president before who is dropping hints all over the place that he might not accept the results of an election. What are we going to do about this? And so people started reading the history of nonviolent resistance to coups. And my first message is that they found something very, very encouraging, which is that around the world, we have examples of people standing up and saying no to undemocratic power grabs. And just through mass participation and nonviolent discipline, creative strategizing, people being able to win back control of their democracies in the face of people who want to grab power illegally. So in looking at those historic examples, we started pulling out some key learnings and then offering trainings, sharing those with as many people as possible. So as you mentioned, just in the last few weeks, we're actually at the end of tonight, we'll have reached 8,000 people taking the Choose Democracy training, how to avoid an election-related power grab. And we're still going to continue offering those trainings with tweaks as events unfold. But I just want to share a little bit of what you would learn in that, because I think it's really important for us to ground ourselves in what works and not just in our deepest fears. One of the things that we're seeing, and maybe all of you are feeling, is just a lot of anxiety about this election. And so when we look at successful attempts to thwart coups, we find 4 keys that run through those stories. One is mass participation. It can't just be the usual suspects who show up and protest a coup. It has to be more than the usual suspects. And that relates to the second key, which is alliance building. A lot of the stories involve people building alliances with people who they don't normally work with, and especially appealing to the center. An analogy I've been thinking about, if you play tug of war, we're used to being 2 sides and trying to see which side is stronger. For example, if Sarah's negotiating with the union, for the union with management, there's 2 sides in that. In a coup, it's more complicated. The people who are often spectators are the people who actually have a really big role in deciding which way things go. So it's like you're playing tug of war, and who's on the sidelines, what side they choose, makes a really big difference. Which relates to the third key, which is nonviolent discipline. Coup resistance that sticks to nonviolence, especially in the face of government force, is much more likely to be effective. There's a lot of debates in our activist spaces about nonviolence. We're not engaging that debate. Whatever you think about that in other times, what's shown historically to work in this situation is nonviolent resistance, because it puts into light the sharp contrast between what we're doing and the powers that be that are trying to grab power illegally. The fourth key is a willingness to resist the illegitimate authority and to say, we won't go along with that. So if president decides to refuse to leave office after losing an election, people have to say, we are not going to go along with that. And the same with, decisions that might be made on the state or local level that are illegitimate. And so part of the purpose of the trainings has been to plant this seed with people like, yes, it could happen here. Americans are used to thinking that things can't happen here that we might encourage in other places, but a coup really could happen here. It's important that we use that language to really clarify what's going on. Voter suppression is part of what's happening, and that is a really important issue in and of itself. But we're using the coup language to really distinguish when someone has crossed certain lines in, say, saying that all the votes won't be counted. So that's one of the primary things that people are watching. Is every vote going to be counted? And that's a democratic value that we can argue for, again, across the usual bubbles. Like, there are a lot of people in the center who may not agree with me on all political issues, but they would agree that every vote should be counted. So coming out of the training, we've been encouraging people to take action. And in these weeks leading up to the election, one of those actions has been to contact your local elected officials and really encourage them to take a stand that every vote will be counted in their area. One of the advantages we have in the United States is a lot of decentralization to our government. And so whether it's on the county level or the city level or the state level, there are a lot of political players who can be pressured to play a role in making sure that things go well in their state, that every vote is counted in their state. And so by getting out ahead of this, by having tens of thousands of people sign a pledge saying that they will resist if that's not done, our hope is that that will help to thwart a coup before it ever happens. We know that in the 80s, Ronald Reagan wanted to invade Nicaragua, and many, many people signed a pledge of resistance, and then he didn't invade Nicaragua. That played a role in the climate fight against the Keystone XL pipeline as well, people pledging to do civil disobedience if our politicians don't do the right thing. So there's a number of strategies like that. In the event of an actual coup, I'm so happy to hear, the union representatives here, because that is going to be really important. Organized labor plays a crucial role in these stories. Many federations are looking at the possibility of a general strike in the event of a coup. I was thinking of Sarah saying that the planes can't take off without the flight attendants. And so if people have a general strike and refuse to go to work, that will have a major impact. Pressuring businesses is also a way of pressuring our political system, because we know how much influence money has. So 2 other things I'll say about how this relates to women in particular. One, reading these stories of past coups being thwarted, I noticed that a lot of the histories were written by men, and so the stories of women were not highlighted. But I also saw women very present in these stories, reading between the lines. So one of them is a coup in 1920 from Germany, where a man named Wolfgang Kapp declared himself the ruler. He was from the right-wing party, and everybody recognized that this was a problem who wasn't part of the right wing. So the centrists and the left-wing groups, which often fought with each other, very quickly came together and built an alliance. They called for a general strike, which included the government workers. And so when Wolfgang went in to write a proclamation saying that he was the new leader, he couldn't find anyone to type it for him, because being a man of that era, he didn't know how to type. So the next day he brought his daughter in to type his proclamation. But basically the coup only lasted a few days, because if the people aren't supporting you, you won't be able to get away with that kind of thing. So we have to think about how we can operate in a way that refuses to cooperate with a coup. And that's going to be different for different people in different sectors, whether you're a politician or a union leader or any variety of roles. Part of what we do in the training is help people to think about, how can I plug into this? What will be my piece? The last thing I'll say for myself personally is learning the skills of nonviolent direct action has been so empowering to me as a woman. I've been an activist for 35 years, but much of it was not doing direct action until the last 10 years in the climate movement. Realizing that I can interrupt a corporate shareholder meeting, realizing that in organizing with other people, we can really build power and challenge authority in ways that I was not taught to. I was taught to ask nicely, to write a polite letter, to make a phone call to my senator. And it took me a ridiculously long time to realize that as long as my senator is taking money from the fossil fuel industry, the polite letter is not going to get me anywhere. But once I finally got that, once I finally realized that working with other people, we could build real grassroots power, it changed my life in so many ways. I went to a women's conference once where some of the women were doing that coal walking thing where people walk on hot coals and it's supposed to be like this empowering experience. And I was like, okay, that's cool, but come do direct action. You get that same feeling of empowerment, and it's free and actually makes a difference, and is one of the best ways that we can use to disrupt injustice. I think it's going to be really key in this upcoming period. There's a chance that all the organizing by many groups ahead of time will make it unnecessary. And that's my greatest hope, that people will get trained and then use these skills for the other issues that have been raised tonight. But if not, it's really an important time for us to come together to use the power that we've been building to affect all of the issues that we care about that have been named tonight. So I'm so happy to be here. Thank you.
Thank you so much, Eileen, for your work and for training so many people across this country, whether they're new to progressive politics and activism, or they've been doing this for a while. It's going to take, one thing I know that you guys talk about is we can't keep repeating the same strategies, and I think that's one of the same perspectives we have with Matriarch is it was time for something new, and it doesn't happen overnight, but when it happens, it clicks, and you get some incredible voices in Congress and voices and activists outside of Congress to work in unison. We're just so grateful for your work. And real quick, how can people find out more?
I was just going to say, go to choosedemocracy.us, and we are updating it with our action center of different actions people can take that will be updated as things evolve. There's a trainings tab if you're interested in the trainings, and a lot of resources there as well.
Perfect. Thank you, Eileen. And one of the states that is most likely to be front lines for this electoral coup, at least, is Georgia. Georgia has had record turnout. It has been labeled a swing state, which wasn't even thought of as an option, but it wasn't even on the map a few weeks ago. But Georgia is now front and center for progressives in terms of organizing, specifically communities that are majority minority that have not been invested in, have changed demographically in the last decade or so. And we are just so honored to have one of our former matriarch candidates, and she's now our national organizing director. She was a congressional candidate in 2020 in Georgia. Nabila Islam she spent the majority of her life in Gwinnett County, Georgia, the most diverse district in the state of Georgia. She's the daughter of working class immigrants from Bangladesh. Nabila grew up knowing the struggle of living paycheck to paycheck and working long hours to get by. When she was in high school, her mother needed 2 discs in her back, working as an order puller at a warehouse. And at a young age, Nabila took on that responsibility of helping her family find an attorney and navigate through this crazy legal process in order to fight the insurance company because of this injury, and she won. They won. The family won. She took those issues into her run for Congress. She has worked in politics and organizing as an advocate, as an activist throughout her entire career, and we are just so honored to have Nabila Islam as a member of Matriarch's team, and she's out there on the streets right now organizing voters in this important state. So thank you, Nabila.
Hey guys, thanks for joining us tonight. My name is Nabila Islam, the National Organizing Director of Matriarch. I have the privilege of helping working class women get elected to Congress. You see, I myself just ran for office in Georgia's 7th Congressional District. I ran for about a year and a half actually, and I'm very thankful to have Matriarch's support. And I was so inspired by this organization that after my campaign, I decided to join and help their mission to help elect other women as well. I ran from February 2019 all the way to my June 9th primary. And what I realized while running for office is that the system isn't designed to uplift working class women to Congress. It just isn't. It is cost prohibitive to run for office full time. And you gotta run full time if you wanna run a successful campaign. And so for me, some of the things I had to do was not have health insurance because I couldn't afford it, and pay rent and pay for my utilities and food. I also put my student loans into forbearance. I couldn't afford, paying $250, $300 a month and running for office while not being able to work. So what I realized is that Congress today is over 50% of them are millionaires. Less than 25% are women. Less than 10% of women of color. And that isn't right, because that is not reflective of America. And if we want a country that works for us, it needs to be by us. It needs to be by working women. So when I ran for Congress, I ran on a progressive platform supporting Medicare for all, a Green New Deal, canceling student debt, making sure that housing was affordable, issues that really matter to my community. You see, for progressive candidates to succeed, we don't need the most money. We just need enough resources to get our message out. And so after my campaign, I established an organization called the Progressive List. It's an organization that helps progressive candidates up and down the ballot, federal, state, and local, have the resources they need in order to become early front runners. We can no longer doubt these progressive candidates that have the potential but need the backing in the very beginning, because early money is like yeast. Now, working women are, as I mentioned, not really reflected in the halls of Congress, even down ballot as well. I am working right now on the ground. I'm actually in Gwinnett County at our field office on a Friday, making sure that our 9 early voting locations are staffed with line warmers, that we keep people in line so that they have the ability to vote. In Georgia, we've had a bad history when it comes to voter suppression, And we've been fighting that every single day, whether it's expanding more early voting locations, making sure that our hours aren't cut, making sure that we have poll workers and that the county is processing the poll applications. It is one after the other of obstacles. And you see, when Republicans can't win on policy, they got to cheat. And in Georgia, I've learned that that is something that they're not afraid to do because they feel as if that they can get away with it. And we are making sure here in Georgia that they are not. So I'm excited that in the next couple of days on Tuesday, we're going to flip Georgia blue for the first time in, I think, 20 plus years. And I just wanted to say that we need to organize if we want to see the change that we want to see in our communities, that we want to see in Congress, that we want to see in a Biden presidency. We need to make sure that our voices are heard, that we are, push for progressive policies at the federal level that help working women on the ground, that help working class families, and make sure that our voices are heard. Look at Congress today. The leading voices in Congress are the squad. Whether it's Congresswoman Ocasio-Cortez, Congresswoman Rashida Tlaib, Congresswoman Ilhan Omar, Congresswoman Ayanna Pressley, these are the leading voices for freshman women. And they are the ones that are guiding this progressive movement. And I couldn't be more happy to say that they were actually folks that inspired me to run. And I hope that even though I wasn't successful this time around, that my run will be able to inspire others as well. So if you're watching this and if you've wanted to run for office, do it. You owe it to your communities, you owe it to yourself, to everyone that you care about, and give them a voice that they deserve. Just put one foot in front of the other. And I know it's hard, trust me. Reach out to me if you're thinking about running, and we'll help you. But most of all, keep up the faith. Make sure you vote if you haven't yet. Make a plan to vote. And on November 3rd, let's take our country back.
Thank you so much, Nabila. Oh my gosh. If Georgia turns blue and we have some progressive leadership like Nabila Islam, we know that there are going to be extraordinary voices either this time around, next time around, who are going to lead that charge. We are excited because it's not just states like Georgia that are conservative. New York State, believe it or not, is not all New York City. It is not socialist headquarters, even though there are definitely parts of New York City that seem to be. I'm talking about Long Island, which used to be off of the map. Nope, you just don't touch Long Island. No one invests in Long Island. The working people, progressives, Long Island, they don't care about the environment. They don't care about Medicare for all. Well, that's false. And Melanie Dorigo, she is one of our matriarch candidates. She's an extraordinary activist. She's a community leader. She's organized marches and rallies and protests. She just spent, the last few weeks protesting on Capitol Hill the Supreme Court hearing, which seemed to be sort of ignored by the mainstream press. And I say this because Amy Coney Barrett was confirmed, and I didn't even get an alert on my phone. New York Times barely put it on its front page. But Melanie Dorigo was out there not just fighting for all working people and the entire country, but bringing it back to choice, which is a class issue. And I think it's really important to recognize that the majority of women who don't have access to choice because of the prohibitive measures of Republican legislatures that are pushed on working class women. Melanie Dorigo, thank you for running, and really thank you for everything you've done for this movement. The floor is yours, and you are on mute, just so you know. Good to go.
Yeah, okay, great. Thank you so much for having me. I am so excited to be here tonight. And I have to say, listening to all of these women who have just spoken before me, I am just so humbled to be in the company of these fierce, amazing ladies who are just really inspiring to all of us. So I'm grateful to be here. I do want to take a moment to thank you all at Matriarch, not just for putting on tonight's event, but for your unwavering support and commitment to electing working class women women, especially when those women may not meet the traditional metrics our current political system has defined. So I'll talk a little bit about my run. I ran for Congress in what is traditionally considered a purple district, although I tested and continue to test the theory that we are actually, in fact, a blue district. My primary opponent was a heavily corporate funded candidate whose family is a political institution here on Long Island. And he's chosen to take very conservative stances on policy that really do not reflect my district at all. So I ran on a very progressive platform, and I did it because I believe in an America that doesn't make people choose between paying their rent or paying for their medication. An America that treats all people equally with dignity, no matter their skin color, religion, gender, or sexual orientation. One that welcomes the stranger, not locks them in cages. An America that believes in bodily autonomy for everyone, not one that creates barriers for poor women to access abortion. I believe in an America that prioritizes the health and sustainability of our planet over corporate profits and campaign donations. And, I ran because we need a government that puts people first. But this America, as we all know, has not been realized yet. We are one of the only industrialized nations in the world that does not have universal health care. We don't have paid family leave, and we're one of a handful of countries that has not ratified the Paris Agreement. But here is the thing, and I think this is the crux of it all. Our problems aren't being solved because those in charge are actively choosing not to solve them. We can have nice things. We can elect to legislate in a progressive way, but our leaders are choosing not to. And so really what it comes down to is representation, right? Like our current laws, they primarily benefit and reflect the will of those who make them, which, as we all know, are primarily white, wealthy men. We need more women in Congress, right? We know that there's 25% of women in Congress right now. Less than half of them are women of color, and there's only 5% of mothers in Congress. And so until we start electing working class women, our laws they'll continue to ignore our needs. This is such an interesting time, Nabila, because we are just a few days away from, the most important election of our lifetime. And this moment will no doubt go down in history as one of the darkest times in our country. We're bordering on fascism. As you just said, the Supreme Court has been unjustly packed, not only with conservative justices, but now with at least two who will choose their personal ideology over the ideals of which this country was built on. And so, the question remains, how will we meet this moment? How will we show up today as women for our granddaughters tomorrow? And how do we normalize the idea that women can not only run, but they can win and they can lead? Just to tell a quick anecdote for me, as a first-time female congressional candidate with no political capital at all, my motivations were challenged all the time. I heard questions like, well, what have you done to deserve the opportunity to run for Congress? Or these undermining questions like, well, you sure? Maybe you should run for school board. Or my personal favorite, why don't you try to fill some potholes first before running for Congress? As if there is some imaginary qualifier to represent one's community, as if to say that even though our planet is on fire and kids are locked in cages and people are dying in the street, we should just keep it status quo because we as women all know why they say that, right? They say this one thing that we hear all the time, which is, I'm not quite sure what it is, but there's something about her that I just don't like, right? But of course, we all know exactly what that something is, because every time a woman steps into her power to run for office, when she dares to shake up the system, when she dares to have the audacity to show up in a space that wasn't designed for her, that's exactly the phrase we hear. So we might as well name it, right? It's sexism, it's misogyny, it's racism, it's xenophobia, it's discrimination. It's deeply rooted. It's a deeply rooted insecurity, born from the patriarchal system that has taught men that somehow they are more than others, right? So I'm so excited to be here with you all tonight. And what I would like to just say to everyone watching, the only way we're going to change the system is by changing our elected officials. So if you are out there and you are considering running for office, I'm here to say, do it, okay? Run for office. And for everyone out there who believes in progressive policy, please get involved, join this movement, because here's what I know. Here's what I've learned. In order for more of us to win, more of us need to run. And for more of us to run, we need more of us to pitch in. So that means every phone call, every canvas, every conversation, every donation helps us move and build this movement. Each of us that step up to these challenges help us pave the way for future progressive women to not only run, but to win. And every action we take, every office we run for really brings us closer to the progressive policies we know we must enact if we're ever going to realize the idealized America that we were all promised. So even if you don't win, right? I didn't win my primary, but we changed the shape of Long Island politics. A progressive had never run for Congress in my district. And now we know that we not only inspired more people to run, but we showed that there is a path to victory. And now forever, my campaign will be part of the story that helped shift that change on Long Island. So, even if we don't, win, enough votes to move on in the election, we still win because we're moving the movement forward, right? And so here we are, we are a couple of days away. Where do we go from here? How do we meet this moment? How do we do it? We do what generations of women have done before us. We will push the boundaries. We'll continue to show up. We'll continue to run. We'll organize. That is how we're going to win. We must, of course, remember that we are sisters and our destiny is bound to one another. And we must, we will fight together. We must fight together. We must fight for our dignity. We must do it together. That is so, so important. Lastly, I don't want to take up too much time. I really, from the bottom of my heart, just want to thank Matriarch so much and encourage everybody out there to support Matriarch. I know from very personal experience that they are truly invested in rebalancing the power structure and electing working class women. For me, you all taking the time to invest in my campaign and provide early guidance and really building that sisterhood of support was something that really made my campaign very enjoyable. It's something I'll never forget. And I will, of course, always support you. And I just want to do a quick shout out to our, my fellow Matriarch endorsed candidates, Cori Bush and Marquita Bradshaw. I can't wait for you to push the boundaries in DC, see what y'all got. And a quick shout out to Christine Pellegrino, who's running right here in my home state. Give them hell, ladies. Thank you so much for having me tonight. It's a real pleasure to be here.
Thank you, Melanie. Oh my God, your energy. We missed that energy. So focused, so energetic. And really, it is hard to lead off Cori Bush, but of course you brought it.
I had to do it for my sister, Cori Bush, right? I have to lift everyone up a little bit. Not that she needs it, right? She's such a powerhouse. We're so lucky to have her. And this is just, the beauty of Matriarch, supporting the women who need it most. So thank you again.
We've had so many beautiful conversations as a crew, the Matriarch team and all the Matriarch candidates through the hard times of COVID, especially trying to figure out how to campaign victories, losses, and, no matter what happens. And Cori's the perfect person to represent that. You just keep running and you keep fighting and you block it all out and you just stay focused. So with that, she does not need an introduction because the whole world knows who she is now. They've heard her voice. Her voice is going to rumble the halls of Congress. Cori Bush is a nurse. She's a pastor. She's a single mother. She was a Ferguson-made activist that ran to represent, and is running, I should say, Missouri's 1st district in the U.S. Congress. She's a lifelong St. Louisian, I don't know how to say it. Oh my God, St. Louis. She understands the struggles of our communities because she has faced them. She really took on the establishment and folks, I got to tell you, knowing her firsthand and how she faced COVID in the hospital twice during her campaign, faced hate from the far right, including the 2 nasty, horrible people that showed up in their front lawns pointing guns at St. Louis activists and then called her out at the Republican National Convention. Cori did not stand down. She stood up and she raised her voice, and we know that she's going to do that in Congress. She is one of our founding members. She is one of our incredible leaders, the Matriarch movement, and she's just a couple of days away from being elected officially a congresswoman. Cori Bush.
Hello, everyone. I'm Cori Bush, Democratic nominee for Missouri's 1st Congressional District. I'm a single mother, registered nurse, ordained pastor, and an activist. And if I'm elected on November the 3rd, I will become the first Black Congresswoman from the state of Missouri. It's amazing for me to be here today because Matriarch has accompanied and supported me throughout this entire cycle. That means a lot to me because even though our race has received support from regular folks all over the nation, we didn't have a ton of support from other groups at first. Matriarch believed in me from day one, and that support makes all the difference for working women like myself running for office. It's not easy for working women to run for office. This cycle, I dedicated myself to the campaign full time, which meant I gave up my employer-provided health care. That left me uninsured with pre-existing conditions. I came down with what I believe was COVID and endured 2 hospitalizations. It took me 2 months to recover, and while I'm feeling better now, I still have to work through the medical debt. That's the story of racism, sexism, and economic injustice in America. That is a story that so many of us have been experiencing for so long, and it's only gotten clearer. I don't bother to count the number of times I've been told I don't look the part. It was so familiar to me watching a Republican mock Senator Kamala Harris's name and by extension, her identity. Every piece of my image is scrutinized as a Black woman, from my braids to my hips to my vocabulary, but I never let that stop me. My experiences drive how I connect with others because I share the story of so many folks across this district that have been totally left out of politics as usual. It's hard enough running for office as a Black woman, but running as a working class single mother was another level. And running against a Black male incumbent was another level on top of that. I never wanted to run for office. I actually used to make a point of saying that I would never become a politician because I saw how hard it was for my dad, who's been a public servant for as long as I can remember. But then I became a parent, and then I became a single parent, working for years through a system that had me struggling to pay my bills. And then Mike Brown was killed, and he was just a baby like my own son. And I couldn't stand by because it was my job to care for people. It's always been my job as a nurse, as an ordained pastor, as a child care worker, as a mother. So I protested. Every day I went back, every day for more than 400 days. And I saw our elected representative one time. We were being maced, beaten, and attacked in the streets, but our congressman only showed up for a photo op. A few people asked me to run for this seat. And at first, I refused. But I decided again that I couldn't just stand by. So I decided to go ahead and run. My friend and sister, Ohan Ashe, will say, "You may not do politics, but politics will do you." It's something I've spoken out about a lot this cycle because I think it's important to share some of the lessons I've learned from multiple races so that others can follow without reinventing the wheel. Most people don't understand all the ins and outs of our political system because it's increasingly hard to understand, and that is intentional. Many of the social services, public goods, and conventional protections our government is supposed to provide are being attacked. Increasingly, our voting rights and the foundations of our democratic processes are being stripped away. They would not be trying to attack our power if they weren't so threatened by it, because they know that when we vote, they lose. So it's more important now than ever that we use whatever platform we have to educate our communities about the political tools that we have at our disposal. As we know, it's all on the line this election year. Our true victory will not be delivered through the presidency. Our victory is the people power we mobilize for this election, up and down the ballot, and that we continue to mobilize to ensure we get what we need for the next 4 years and beyond. This movement is not about the White House. This movement is about the people. and I believe in the people.
Oh my goodness. Cori Bush, the one and only Cori Bush. We are just so grateful to have her on our team. And I am, I gotta tell you, I think we're going to video, right? Are we up on video? I think, here we are. Yep, am I on screen? Here we go, guys. Sorry, this is Zoom land. I'm back! Thank you to all of you who have been here throughout this summit. We are so honored to have Cori Bush close it out for us, our sister, our founding member, and I'm excited to introduce you to Dominique Shumanova, who is our political director. We are going to talk to you a little bit about what Matriarch does and what we plan on doing with this lineup, plus many, many, many more. I mean, if you can imagine 3-4 times this, that is who has been involved. There was not enough time. If we were in a real-life summit, maybe there would have been enough time. But that is who is involved in this extraordinary project. So Dominique is our political director. She has been working very closely with all of the campaigns and the candidates, and she has seen them through this entire year, this historic year, really maneuver the normal obstacles you face, which you've heard about now, but also just the obstacles of COVID. So she has been hands-on. And Dominique, you're on mute still, but I want to just talk to you a little bit about what we have planned. This was just the beginning. And how people can get involved, because 2021 is going to be an organizing year and a recruitment year. And we are not just a PAC, just so you guys know. We also have another entity that focuses on education, organizing, that is really going to be delving deep into that next year. So if you don't plan on running for office, if you're an activist, if you're an organizer, if you want to join a campaign, make sure to get involved now, because this is really what the work is going to be next year. Dominique, do you want to talk a little bit about where people can go, what folks can do?
Absolutely. I'm so humbled. I teared up like multiple times tonight. I'm sure some of you at home were also moved by some of what you heard. I'm so inspired by all of tonight's speakers and also by all of our candidates. I'm just such a fan of all these women, and I'm definitely going to be going back and listening again and going back to the YouTube link, which you can all do as well and watch later. It has been such a privilege for me to work with Matriarch since our launch a year ago, and I've had a front row seat, as Nomi said, to each of these candidates and their families, honestly, and their staff members and their volunteers, and what they sacrificed in order to vie to represent their communities and to represent the communities that are the most disproportionately affected by things like COVID, and to have that seat at the table. And it is really punishing if you're a woman, especially if you're a progressive woman, especially if you're a working class progressive woman, watching our candidates run in a pandemic without health insurance, or having to, be in their 40s and give up their apartment to be able to run, or live income free for a year or for 2 years. It's just such an immense sacrifice. And Melanie, who just spoke, she has 3 children under the age of 10. I'm in complete awe. And they went with her to the Supreme Court, by the way.
To be fair, you also were pregnant this year. So
yes.
I hate to do that. Somehow Dominique managed, 9 months into pregnancy on I won't even say what you were doing, but she didn't stop working because she believed in the mission, even though we tried to get her to stop working.
I'm usually breastfeeding on these Zooms, and I was working straight through labor, in fact, for Matriarch, but it's been such a privilege, and obviously that's like the literal definition of Matriarch. We are not all mothers, though, and I think it's been powerful to include all women, and we have younger women and older women and women of all creeds. We'd hoped to include, we have 2 trans women on our board. We'd hoped to include in this conversation tonight. Unfortunately, they had a conflict, but when we say all women, we mean it, and it's really powerful. I think women are so often pitted against one another by society. It's like this high school mentality. Oh, she's prettier than you. Oh, your boyfriend, whatever nonsense, drama, catty, and even within the political sphere, as though there's only room for one woman at the table. And I think something really powerful happens when we just reject that, and when we decide to have each other's backs, even though we're all strong women, and we can be strong and we can wear makeup or not, and we can still have each other's backs and be worthy of a seat at the table and of respect. So it's been a powerful experience for me and all along, as well as tonight. And we are going to be getting involved even earlier. We got involved with some of these campaigns when they had barely raised $10,000. Some of them, ended up getting Bernie Sanders support or AOC, like a couple of weeks before their primaries, when often it's too late, unfortunately, to make a difference on the ground. And I can't stress enough early support and how much it means. Also late support. It's not too late to support Marquita Bradshaw and Cori Bush, our remaining candidates. But please sign up for our email list at matriarchpac.com. You can follow us on Twitter at matriarch.org. You can reach out to me directly, Dominique@matriarchpac.com. But those two remaining candidates of ours, I'm just in total awe of. One of them toppled the dynasty, Cori Bush, who just never let anything distract her. She is going to transform Congress. I think we've seen the power of freshman congresswomen, and that they don't necessarily just sit quietly and go with the flow. I think she is going to just absolutely rock Congress. I cannot wait to have her in Congress. She'll be truly transformative. And Marquita Bradshaw, who's running for U.S. Senate in Tennessee, who accomplished the impossible in her primary. She spent very little money. I think it was $6,000 to her opponent's $2 million. So they'll tell you, don't bother, sit down, it's not your turn. I think women are just not taken seriously when they often should be.
And if I can just chime in real quick, I think what's a really interesting perspective about that is something that's been a theme all night is what it means to be an organizer, a union organizer, an activist. Marquita is a longtime organizer, and one thing that we are prioritizing at Matriarch, if we haven't made clear tonight, but we will be, especially in coming years, next cycle in particular, is we are actively seeking union organizers, union members, movement organizers, because they make such strong candidates. They understand the issues personally, deeply through their work, and they know how to organize. So they build an organization and a structure in their campaign that even if they don't have millions of dollars, it can topple a Democratic Senate campaign committee candidate who didn't even speak with Marquita. And then Marquita rocked the world on primary night in Tennessee and won the Tennessee nomination. And people say, oh, Tennessee, it's not a Democratic state, you shouldn't put money into it. That's BS. You see Amy McGrath, John Ossoff, they're getting a lot of money, and the establishment doesn't care. Marquita is a woman of color. She's an organizer who's been on the front lines herself. And let's not forget, 20 years ago, 25 years ago, Tennessee was represented by Democrats, Al Gore. So we can win back these states if we prioritize candidates who speak from these lived experiences. So if you haven't already checked out Marquita Bradshaw, she's in the final stretch. It's a tough race. The Republicans are obviously pouring a lot of money into her, to attacking her and into winning. But we believe Tennessee is winnable. And next cycle, as Dominique has laid out, we are going to be recruiting and training candidates and candidates from these communities, from all communities across the country, conservative communities, progressive communities, who have an organizing background, who are of working class, who can prioritize our issues, all women. And with that, a lot of you have shown us love for the first time tonight. Thank you for joining us. If you want to be a part of Matriarch, please join us on our website, matriarchpac.com. And if you feel inclined, we obviously, we're an organization, a grassroots organization, so contributions are highly encouraged because it keeps us being able to do this kind of work. And I think, Dominique, we're going to be posting segments of this summit in the coming weeks on our YouTube account and on social media. So if you missed it, if you want to share this with folks who didn't see the summit, we will be releasing it in different ways. Dominique, any final notes before we wrap up? Oh, we have to say
just
thank
putting
you to our
the
board,
summit together, seeing everybody who spoke tonight, everyone that's been behind the scenes of supporting our candidates this year. It's been such a powerful coalition, such a group effort, such a sisterhood. And we don't always agree. We're not all the same. We're not cookie cutter. We don't live in the same area of the country. We don't have the same backgrounds, but coming together around our common shared values and building community and supporting women who are rooted in their values and in their communities has been such a powerful thing. And so tonight has been just an honor. And working with our board of directors, our advisory council, we have a leadership council of former candidates who have been incredible, including women who have run for office before. I'd just like to shout out to all our 2020 candidates, to our leadership council, our board of advisors, and our board of directors, and Nomiki.
Let's do a quick shout out to Praveen Singh, who's on our board of directors, Kate Albright-Hannah, Rania Batriz, Amy Valette, Malala, myself, I guess, Christina Pellegrino, who's running for office, and Malahat Rafai, and of course to Dominique and to Nabila. Dominique, who's been there from the beginning, who's run many, many campaigns, who's always working with women. You know, you are the heart and soul of this. You obviously always don't get the limelight, but you're out there working hard, texting folks and making sure that the trains operate. Priya and Zand, thank you. Dorsey, producing backstage, thank you so much. And you know, onward. We're gonna do this.
All right, GOTV, everybody.
Thank you all.